Here's the bottom line. I think there are a few questions that remain unanswered. Well, first, there is the first incident, which is the Chinese spy balloon incident, which is probably the most troubling. And now we have these 3 subsequent shoot downs, including one that transited over Wisconsin and was ultimately shot down over Lake Huron. For the latter 3, the recovery effort is still underway. And until we recover the material, until we analyze it, we're not going to know where it came from or whether it was a spy balloon or some sort of other unidentified aerial phenomenon. Now, if it turns out that the subsequent 3 were from foreign adversaries, that would be a big deal. I mean, I've spoken with people at the highest level, and they understand that would be a big deal, particularly if it was revealed that these were all from China. But we don't have that information yet. For the first incident, I have not yet been satisfied with answers to basic questions such as, why didn't we shoot it down earlier? If we figured out how to shoot it down without risk of civilian casualties, why didn't we shoot it down? Why would we have known about it if it weren't for the intrepid reporting of the Montana Billings Gazette? Why am I learning about things as a member of the Intel Committee, Armed Services Committee, from the Montana Billings Gazette? Would the administration have revealed this to us, or would it let the balloon lazily drift over the United States so as not to imperil Secretary Blinken's visit to China? And finally, and perhaps what is unknowable, is whether the CCP and Xi Jinping intentionally timed this espionage effort with Secretary Blinken's visit to send a message to us, a message such as, here's what we can do to you and get away with, and you'll do nothing. So there's a lot of questions to you. I guess if I could add one more thing, we've had reports of UAPs for years. It's why Congress set up an office called AARO and forced the administration to take this issue seriously. Now, I know a lot of people dismiss it because it instantly becomes a talk about aliens. But here's the reality. Things are showing up on our training ranges. They're fouling our ranges, like the ranges our pilots fly around to train on, and we don't know what they are. If for no other reason than we want our pilots to be safe, that's a problem. And these latter 3 incidents may reveal that this stuff is happening at a scale that we didn't understand before because we have no process for detecting and neutralizing these things when they appear on our ranges.
Chairman, are you surprised that we do not have the ability to net these? And by that, I mean, I'm not talking about Wile E. Coyote and Acme Inc. and the devices that go wrong. But when we wanted the Soviet submarine that sunk, Howard Hughes built the Glomar Explorer in 1971. It deployed in 1973, and we had a Soviet submarine in 1974. In 3 years, we went from, hey, we got to get that, to having it and grabbing it. How can we not be able to grab a balloon? It's a balloon.
Initially, the suggestion was that, well, these are too high altitude in order to net and grab it, to which I suggest we'll bring it down to a lower altitude. But the first one, I think, was at 60,000 feet or less. So that shouldn't pose an issue. So this should be that kind of Apollo 13 moment where you lock all the nerds in a room and say, if we don't have this capability already, we better darn well develop it, because this won't be the last time we're dealing with things like this. And indeed, the best option would be for us to gain control of it without destroying it, so we can grab it, look under the hood, see what's going on, reverse engineer technology if we wanted to do that, or use it for the purpose of educating the American people as to what we're facing in the Chinese Communist Party. There are times, of course, Hugh, when we need to err on the side of secrecy, particularly when you're dealing with sensitive sources and methods. But I think now is a time that demands transparency. I think once the Pentagon and the FBI and the intelligence community are finished analyzing the debris that we've recovered off the coast of the Carolinas, I think they should put that thing on display. I think they should take it on a tour of the United States and say, here's what the Chinese Communist Party is doing to us. They have no respect for our sovereignty. They're flying balloons over the continental United States. This is who we're dealing with in the CCP. And don't believe, all this. Don't believe the charm offensive that we've seen in recent weeks from the CCP.
Chairman Gallagher, there's a specific claim that has been made that I'd like you to speak to, and I'm not going to comment on it. I want to hear you speak to it, which is not to worry. They've got satellites. They get to see it anyway. Is there any additional spy capability that comes with a balloon at 60, 40, 20,000 feet? Or should we just throw the country open because they've got spy satellite? It made no sense to me. What do you think of that claim?
I think it's totally bogus, to use a gentler term than the one that came to my mind. I can't comment on the specific capabilities, but imagine this. Okay, let's just say this was completely innocuous, or it had limited collection capability. In fact, let's just say it couldn't collect anything that you couldn't get with commercial imagery and $10. Well, it doesn't take a massive stretch of your imagination to think about how they could use such a balloon in a wartime scenario, either to confuse us, to get inside our OODA loop, our decision-making cycle, or potentially to weaponize a balloon like
OODA loop is observe, orient, decide, and act, by the way, right. For the benefit. You just broke the rule.
But, Hugh, you should know, in my first hearing as chairman of the Cyber and Innovation Subcommittee on Armed Services, I outlined the 3 commandments that we have to follow, and one of them is thou shalt not use acronyms or jargon.
Like OODA?
I'm trying here.
Like OODA.
Like OODA. Like OODA. OODA loop is something that's attributed to the great John Boyd, who was a fighter pilot who revolutionized the military. But as a Marine, we adopted Boyd as an honorary Marine, and so we used the jargon. But my point is this: even if this particular balloon had limited intelligence collection value, you got to think about this in terms of one key part of an overall architecture that the PLA could use in a wartime scenario in order to get inside our decision-making cycle, or in order to identify targets for the PLA rocket force to strike. And there was a great Financial Times article that talked about how this is already being incorporated into PLA rocket force doctrine, how in 2018 there was a video of a balloon that actually had missiles on it that is subsequently disappeared from Chinese social media. So I don't buy that dismissing of it. And it also contradicts the narrative now, which is, oh my gosh, this is an intelligence bonanza. We're geniuses for letting this thing drift over the United States so as to shoot it down over the Atlantic and collect it again. So it doesn't make any sense.
Last question. I had Senator Fisher on to scare my audience about the Chinese strategic forces buildup. Are you worried that balloon array, which drifted specifically to Montana and other triad fields of strategic nuclear weaponry, that they are gaining the capability to jam and disable our strategic forces via information interjection, that they can screw up our circuitry, they can blow the fuses, they can be like Dwayne and throw the power off? Do they have the ability to sort of EMP on a localized basis and stop us from deploying weaponry?
Short answer is I don't yet know if they have that level of capability, but it does strike me as a coincidence on the level of, or maybe almost on the level of a pandemic emerging in Wuhan near the Wuhan Institute of Virology, that these things were spotted near Malmstrom and some of our most sensitive military bases. In other words, I don't think it was a coincidence, particularly because the first incident, based on public reporting, they had the ability to control the direction and the flight path, which may have not been the same for incidents 2, 3, and 4. You know, one thing is absolutely certain to me, putting aside the balloon for a second, they are going to target our domestic infrastructure with cyber weapons if we find ourselves in a hot war over Taiwan. And so if nothing else, this incident should hammer home to the American people that this isn't just an over there problem. This is a right here at home problem.
Right now.
In the world we live in, you can't just sort of ignore problems just because you think they're thousands of miles away.
Quick exit, Chairman Gallagher. Is the national news media paying attention to the Select Committee on the threat posed by the Chinese Communist Party?
Not to the extent necessary, I think. But the good news is when we come back into session on the 27th, we're going to start sprinting now that we've gotten all the behind-the-scenes stuff taken care of. Now that we have Democrats, we're going to have our first hearing on the night of the 28th. So stay tuned for that. We're going to drive attention posed by the Chinese Communist Party.
I hope every network carries 228. It's going to be a hearing. Is Fox, is CNN going to cover the hearing live?
We're going to try and make that happen. Some networks are not quite as attuned to this issue as they were to the.
I'm not going to tune into MSNBC. That's not going to happen. Chairman Mike Gallagher, thank you as always. You're late, but like the Packers, you show up, at least for the game. May not be on time, but you show up for the game. Not in the Super Bowl, though. Chairman Mike Gallagher, always a pleasure. Don't go anywhere, America. Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. I'm Hugh Hewitt, live in Studio West, joined by United States Senator Deb Fischer from the great state of Nebraska, part of the Big Ten, even though not always competitive. Good morning, Senator Fischer. Welcome. Good to have you.
Well, good morning, Hugh. Say that was a little harsh there on not being always competitive. So we're hoping for the glory years to return.
I could be harsher if Congressman Gallagher is coming along, and I usually just roll over Wisconsin. So, Senator, let's get to your op-ed, which posted just a couple hours ago over at Fox. It is eye-opening. It's about the Chinese Communist Party and General Secretary Xi's strategic weaponry buildup. And I knew about this intellectually, but the numbers you put here are astonishing. You want to summarize for the audience, because you are the ranking member on the strategic subcommittee of the Senate Armed Services Committee. What is Xi up to?
Well, thank you for bringing that up, Hugh. We have to recognize as a country, and the people of this country have to recognize the threat that China poses. With the balloons coming across the United States, the surveillance there across the continental United States, I think that woke a lot of people up. But China has been building up its nuclear enterprise, and we have been slow to modernize ours. When I look at what they have accomplished in a very, very short period of time, it is truly amazing. They are a pure competitor. They have a triad. They have a goal of tripling their arsenal by 2035. That's only a decade away. They have more ICBM launchers than the United States. They have bombers, a bomber similar to the B-2, and they are building submarines. So this is something that people need to be aware of. And I don't put this out there to scare people, to terrify them, but instead to educate them about what we face. We've seen since the Cold War, the fall of the Berlin Wall, we've kind of been sidelined in this nation with our enterprise, our nuclear enterprise. And we cannot be, because it's the bedrock of our national security.
Now, Senator, I have asked a number of would-be presidential nominees, if the triad cannot be fully funded, which third of it do we not fund? Because we've got to do something. And I know the Columbia class, the B-21, they're both in production. They're going forward. We're not doing it fast enough. I'm wondering if we're past the era of ICBMs, except for a second strike capability. You're the ranking member of the Strategic Affairs Subcommittee. What do you think about shrinking the missile leg of the triad in order to spend what we need on the most survivable legs of the triad?
Oh, I disagree with that completely. The triad, each leg of the triad, serves a unique purpose, and we have to have those ICBMs. For one thing, I personally believe it makes our adversaries take a step back and think about attacking the heartland of the United States, because that's where our ICBM silos are. That alone causes them to rethink any kind of aggressive action that they would have. It is also an extremely vital part. I don't think many people also realize, Hugh, that our bombers are not loaded. So in effect, right now, we have a triad, or we have a dyad with our submarines and our ICBMs. So there would have to be policy changes and buy-in from Congress to be able to change our posture when it comes to our bombers.
Well, Senator, I want to pursue this with you. I would build it all. I would spend the money, but we just spent $7 trillion in emergency spending, and none of it went to the industrial base to maintain the strategic deterrent we have, much less expand the B-21 production, the Columbia-class production. I don't know that you're going to get your Democratic colleagues to spend more than what we spent plus 3% or whatever the inflation number is. I don't know if we can afford it because Democrats won't spend. You and I agree we should modernize all parts of the triad and maybe add a new leg in space, but we're just not spending the money because Democrats don't want to.
You know, that's a mission that I've embraced in my time in the Senate and on the Strategic Forces Subcommittee, is to try and get senators from both sides of the aisle more involved in this discussion. And I believe we have in the Senate. You'll see support for our modernization to keep us on schedule when it comes to the triad and the platforms that we have. There is buy-in. There is recognition of the threats that we face and just what we need in order to address them. Remember, we have two peer competitors when it comes to our nuclear forces, Russia and China. We didn't have to face that before either. Yeah. And as I said earlier, when you look at the aggression, the testing, the pokiness in the eye that the Chinese are blatantly doing now, I think, at least on the Senate side, people have stepped up.
Senator, they've never lurched. China has never lurched for first strike ability before. And I'm a veteran of the Reagan years.
They danced around it. That's kind of, what we thought was their posture when it came to their nuclear forces. And they've shown clearly that is not their posture.
Well, that's what your op-ed is so eye-opening about. It looks like they're trying to get first strike capability and counting on American incoherence to allow our triad to decay to the point where they could Pearl Harbor us. I go back to the era of the MX missile debate when it dominated Time magazine, and we used to look at those charts, and the American public understood the number of missiles that Russia had, the number of missiles the Soviets had, the number of missiles the Americans had, and the fact that we had survivability. I don't know that we do, except at sea right now. What do you think?
I believe we do. I think we have strong capabilities. As I said, I think each leg of the triad serves a very unique purpose. And so that's why I'm definitely a huge supporter that we modernize our triad, keep it on schedule, and be able to hopefully even speed it up. But there again, you get into the manufacturing of what we need and what we are facing there with time limits, constraints that we have, and not being able to, no matter how much money you're going to put behind it, it would be a challenge to be able to speed it up to any substantial degree.
Senator, is the B-21 fleet on schedule? That's our strategic bomber. And do you think the Columbia class will get into the water when we need it to get into the water? Because I have read astonishingly alarming stories on our industrial base. It's just not there. We've allowed it to disintegrate.
I worry about that all the time. And I think it's important to keep funding, as I said, with the modernization, to take into consideration and be able to fund with the inflation costs that are out there, to make sure our industrial base knows that we are committed to certain programs and they need to keep them online. All of those play into the timeline that we have.
Now, Senator King is a serious guy across the aisle when it comes to strategic security. Who else works with you? Because you need 60 votes to move anything forward, especially on the appropriations side. And the House can support you right now in a defense budget that's serious about the deterrent. But who will be the 10 Democrats who come alongside of the 49, or the 11 Democrats who come alongside the 49 Republicans to vote for a serious defense budget?
Mm-hmm. I think when you look at the last 2 years, the budget that President Biden sent to us, and the overwhelming support that we had in the Senate Armed Services Committee to add to that budget, to increase it, because, again, there's an understanding there of the needs, and to see support on the floor, too. Senator King is wonderful to work with, and we have a great working relationship on the Strategic Forces Subcommittee. Our staffs work well together. We have a kind of a mind meld when it comes to what we need. There are a lot of other good members out there. Jeanne Shaheen is great. Jack Reed is a good chairman of the committee. Mark Kelly is an active, good member on the Strategic Forces Subcommittee. So there's a number of good members on both sides of the aisle.
I got the 4 there, so I hope you can find me 7 more Democrats who are serious about deterring China from ever thinking about Pearl Harboring us, because they look like they're building that capacity. Senator Deb Fischer of Nebraska,